Hello and welcome to the Genetics Podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Short. My background is in population genomics and studying the genetic causes of rare disease. I did my PhD at the Sanger Institute in the University of Cambridge and have been in biotech since 2018 when I started Sonogenetics. Sonogenetics helps academic and industry researchers to run large-scale genetic testing programs that speed up their clinical trials, generate data sets for the next big breakthrough, and give participants the best possible experience taking part in research. Each episode of the Genetics Podcast, we bring you insights from the leading minds in genetics and precision medicine, including household names and Nobel Prize winners, as well as early career scientists and biotechs working on the next big breakthrough. Whether you are a scientist, entrepreneur, executive, patient advocate, or simply someone curious about how genetics shapes our world, you're in the right place. Thank you for listening, and let's get started. Welcome, everyone, to the Genetics Podcast. I'm very excited to be here this week with Dr. Benny Sorensen, who's the CEO of Hemab Therapeutics, a company that I've admired for a really long time in the way that they take really like a truly patient-centric way to drug development. You're going to learn about this from Benny and how he talks and how he thinks and how they've built the company. They're a clotting disorder company, so they're focused on looking at bleeding disorders, including some of the common ones that you may have heard of and also many rare ones that you haven't. And it's an amazing vision for the company that is also really focused on early prevention rather than waiting until somebody's having a terrifying hemorrhage or something that can really affect their life, to being much more predictive and proactive with the way to approach this broad class of disorder. So Benny, thanks for joining us and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
So maybe you can set the scene by giving people, when you talk about bleeding disorders and building, I think you all call it the ultimate clotting company. What are we talking about here? What might people have heard of and things that people might not about this very broad set of conditions?
Well, that's great. Yeah. So Hemab Therapeutics, yes, we want to build the ultimate clotting company to make it catchy, but really pursuing a vision of reimagining blood clotting therapies at the heart of human resilience. And that really translates into a mission of leveraging what we learn from people living with blood clotting disease, like Glanzmann Thrombasthenia, factor VII deficiency, von Willebrand's disease, just to mention a few, and kind of, listen to learn and then translate their lived experience into what would a good treatment really look like. And that's where the reimagining comes in, is the, if what we hear is you live with different struggles and concerns and fears, what would the best medicine look like? So that is, that's part of the vision, and the mission is really to be super ambitious, but really at the source of everything we do, carefully listening to the lived experience. And translate that into making innovative, modern, transformative drugs. And I think part of that is really enjoying that we are living in what I call like a biotechnological revolution right now. There are so many biotechnological technologies that actually work. So the time has never been more ripe to actually go and listen to individual people and then say, okay, then, we should design medicine that can do X, Y, Z. We should use this technology for that technology for something else. And then quickly kind of get through discovery and into development and start learning about how those medicines potentially can help and change people's lives. So the reimagination is really starting with listening. At the heart of human resilience, that's something really personal. And it's down to, I strongly believe that everything we do is personal. And everything starts with empathy. It starts with really listening to people. If we do that, we are more likely to push ourselves to the limit and beyond. And I think we are more likely to make the right decisions.
Yeah.
So, hey, that is, in just a few words, who we are, what we do, and hopefully, why we are so excited about it.
Yeah, and if we follow that thread into some of the bleeding disorders you focus on today, I would love if you could share one or two examples of what you've learned from working backwards from what the patients actually want and need. One of the things that's always been surprising to me in drug development is you have these amazing technological innovations, and those are part of the equation, but also sometimes it can come down to delivery method or frequency or some of these things that
Hmm.
are also technologies. But I'd love to hear, like, what are you learning about the therapeutic modalities and the advanced Cambrian explosion, I think, that you referred to there, but also some of the things that may not seem as Star Trek, but are nonetheless very important to patients.
Yeah, no. By the way, just before it becomes Star Trek, it starts with the listening part.
Yeah.
And I think just to give you a couple of examples, now almost 5 years ago, when the idea of Hemab started to sprout, one of the first idea we were processing was whether sutacimig, who's now a drug that is through phase 2 and has kind of generated a lot of really exciting data. We asked the question back then: could this be a treatment for people with Glanzmann Thrombasthenia? First thing I did was, I had been in this space for like many years, so I called like 20 trusted friends and colleagues in the space, and I said, "What do you think about this idea?" They pretty much every single one said to me, "Benny, yeah, that's interesting, but I don't think they have a problem."
Right.
And I was like, "That is interesting." Called next one. Yeah, they rarely bleed. Oh, okay. Um, you know, One thing though was I could have given up after the fifth call and just said, okay, that's apparently not a problem. But I really insisted that, you know what, now I've heard from multiple of my physician and nurse colleagues, let's ask the patients. And when we did that, right, from the they never bleeds, I don't think there's a problem. We have documented in natural history studies, these people have extraordinarily frequent bleed events. The bleed events are not just simple, many times potentially life-threatening.
And it could be every week for some
Or
patients.
it could be every day.
Yeah.
There are people reporting bleeds every single day. So I was kind of like, that's part of being unreasonable. We'll get to that hopefully at some time point today. But being unreasonable is insisting we are not done exploring whether there is a problem before we have heard many people living with this actually, explaining what is the lived experience. So I think before it comes to
for people who aren't as familiar with Glanzmann, maybe you can just dwell on that for a minute of what is life like for many patients with that disease.
Yeah.
People aren't familiar with it.
So it's what we call a primary hemostatic defect. It means it's a disorder of blood platelets. It's caused by a deficiency or dysfunction of a glycoprotein called 2B3A. The way it manifests itself is you get very frequent bleed events in your mucosal membranes, in your skin. You can also get bleeds in the mucosal membranes covering your joints, the mucosal parts of muscles. And, those bleed events are kind of unlike what we know from hemophilia A and B. It's like it's a joint bleed. Here we have, it can be extensive nosebleeds, gum bleeds, mouth bleeds, tongue bleeds, bleeds in your gastrointestinal tract, urogenital bleeds. So just, we're not talking about, it's a wide range of different bleed events. And when you're kind of, as an everyday person, you hear nosebleed, you're like, yeah, it doesn't sound that bad. But when you've had a nosebleed nonstop for 8 hours, you have lost so much blood that you're now dizzy, and you can feel your heart is, beating extremely fast. You're actually potentially dying from that nosebleeds. That's the type of nosebleed these people can have. So something extremely serious. So imagine back in those days, right? The first 5, 10, 20 phone calls was, there's no problem. We took the step further and said, insist listening to the people living with this disease. And then when we kind of had that in front of us, it was like, well, more than ever, we need to make medicine that can prevent this. Treating every single event sounded like, just overwhelming, right? If there was a bleeding disorder in the world that was calling or screaming for preventative therapy, it's one where people are reporting 50, 60, 80 bleed events a year, which is many more than what we see with hemophilia A and B. So the motivation got into the highest gear. And then it was really down to, okay, what are the options we have at hand? What do we know work from a clinical point of view, from a genetics point of view? What are the validated technologies that we could leverage? And kind of fast forward it all, we made a bispecific antibody that recapitulates a clinically validated mechanism. And now fast forward even further, 34 patients has been dosed in phase 2, and we have a high degree of confidence that we have a drug that can be truly life transforming for these people.
And I saw, it was a number of months ago now, but some of your early data at the European Hematology meeting, and you're progressing not just in Glanzmann's, but in von Willebrand disease and a number of other programs. Could you talk a little bit about the universe of bleeding disorders? And maybe people are probably a little bit familiar with hemophilia, but hemophilia has gotten a ton of funding, a ton of attention. There's a lot of therapeutics there, and much of the rest of the space is probably 5 to 10 years behind, maybe, right? I'd love your perspective on that of what have we learned there, and what lessons can we take to the rest of the space?
By the way, let's start with hemophilia A and B, because it is just such an amazing story of biotechnological revolution on top of biotechnological revolution that has led to a completely different standard of care today. But if you dial back 1950s and 60s, hemophilia was a bleeding disorder where people had increased mortality. It was not before then that you started to understand, okay, it's a disorder of blood clotting. It was discovered that the missing component in blood could be recovered in something called cryoprecipitate, which was a product manufactured by slowly thawing fresh frozen plasma. And then there was an anti-hemophilia component in that one. Fast forward, that led to plasma-derived concentrates. Then the whole kind of genotyping of factor 8 and 9 happened, which led to recombinant concentrates. I have stopped counting the number of iterations of recombinant concentrates we have for factor 8 and 9, but one kind of set of innovation on top of the other. And then now it's almost 10 years ago when we started thinking about gene therapy. We started thinking about bispecific antibodies that could mimic factor 8. And so where we are today, in 2025, we have more than 30 approved products for hemophilia A and B, being a continuum of just biotechnological revolution, which is such an amazing story and should be a stimulus for many other disorders that may be behind. Now, in this race of excitement, if you will, we kind of forgot a lot of other bleeding disorders. So Glanzmann Thrombasthenia, factor 7 deficiency, von Willebrand's disease pretty much has seen no real innovation or revolution for 70 years, right? We are treating these disorders today like we treated hemophilia back in the 1960s. It's all acute bleed management. It's whatever's in the fridge. Nothing is customized or designed to be a modern, preventative, easy to use, very effective therapy for these people. So if you will, you can kind of say we are standing on shoulders of giants who kind of, moved hemophilia care from something really ancient to top-notch modern today. And we are trying to leapfrog treatment into the 21st century for all of these other blood clotting disorders. And there's many of them, right? And individually, some of these are small. I will acknowledge that there are not, millions of people with Glanzmann or Factor 7 deficiency. There is probably about 10,000 patients in US, Europe, Gulf states, and Japan. There's probably 50,000 if you look worldwide. But smaller than the 250,000 we are currently treating with hemophilia today.
Yeah.
But if you take Glanzmann and you put Factor 7 and you put von Willebrand's disease and you put people with other bleeding disorders on top of it, suddenly we are looking at hundreds of thousands of people that somewhat has been forgotten in this system and has been left behind. And you have no idea what a motivator it is to kind of leapfrog their treatment option into the 21st century. That is hugely motivating.
What are the big genetics questions that are open or interesting in the field? So some of these are recessive or monogenic conditions. Other ones, like I'm thinking about von Willebrand's disease or heavy menstrual bleeding or other more common complex don't have that that's the smoking gun gene that you're always looking for. And even the ones that are monogenic, I'm sure have modifiers and other things that make it make it tricky and challenging. I'd love to hear a little bit about that. And you spent 3 years at least at Alnylam, one of the pioneers of genetic medicine. So I know you know a lot about
I have been brainwashed in a good way. So I think, Patrick, let's actually start with hemophilia again. It's an X-linked disease. That means that overwhelmingly the people that suffer from severe hemophilia are men. And we have probably completely just overlooked that carriers of hemophilia, which are women, or different kind of other genetic compositions, actually can result in women also having very significant bleeding problems. But it was and is still overwhelmingly men that has hemophilia A and B. Now think about it in the following context. Now we're talking about Glanzmann. Now we're talking about Factor 7 deficiency, von Willebrand's disease. All these are autosomal.
Yeah.
So now we have bleeding disorders that equally affects men and women. The only thing we honestly know something about is bleeding disorders in men. So what we have discovered or seen in many of our clinical trials that now have 50-50 men and women is that women, they bleed differently, but they need to be treated equally. And I think that is, from a genetics point of view, as simple as we have actually been obsessing about an X-linked disease.
Yeah.
Now we need to kind of embrace an autosomal disease. Is eye-opening and has resulted in us needing to take very different approaches to make sure we truly do aim for health equality with regards to men and women, because the unmet need is actually disproportional in women because of heavy menstrual bleeding, and no doubt about it. So I think genetically, just the fact that we are now looking at autosomal disorders rather than X-linked has actually been, it sounds so simple.
It's such an important point, though. I hadn't thought about it that way.
But it's such an important point, you have no clue. And the other thing is, of course, many of these are autosomal recessive, which is you can find traits of inheritance that you do need to kind of take into account. It often requires you to have a much broader holistic thinking with regards to, cultural living or ways of living. And I think that's also actually eventually reflected in our clinical trials, that it's equal amount of men and women. If you look at the ethnicity distribution across our trials, very broad compared to like what's usually published with clinical trials. And it's all down to, as a company, we need to kind of embrace this, accept this, and say, we are not here to be fast and finish in a subsegment that is not representative of the entire disease, but we need to really kind of make sure all aspects, all subgroups are proper represented.
When you think about the long-term vision and the arc of the company, you're focused on bispecific antibodies, I think, for most of your programs today. Do you think that therapeutic modality is going to scale across all of bleeding disorders? Are you also thinking about RNA, gene therapy, other
Yeah,
kinds of things that may be the next generation as well?
yeah. We I with extreme pride, I say we are not a platform company. We are a product company. Yes, Sutasimic is a bispecific antibody. Um, our HMB-002 program for Conrobin's disease is a monovalent antibody. The next program that we will launch here on the other side of summer will be a peptide. And the fourth program we will launch will probably be an oligonucleotide. We are not a platform company. We believe in pairing the validated technologies to what the patient's telling us and make sure we make the best medicine and not try to kind of like, well, we got to scale this bispecific technology across everything. I don't think that makes the best medicine necessarily.
Yeah, I tend to agree. And with that, there's trade-offs with that. I think you're going to get, you should get a much better product market fit at the end of the day, right? You choose the right tool for the right outcome. What do you need to do through the drug development process to accommodate that breadth? Because the peptide chemists and the oligo chemists, are these two different teams? How do you think about that?
Yeah, no, by the way, you need one of the best R&D teams in the whole world, which we have, which is great. Which is not necessarily that you need a big team, but you need real drug hunters and drug developers that at the essence know what good medicines look like.
Yeah.
But then keeps an open mind and say, okay, I'm an expert I can make an antibody. I am not an expert in how to necessarily make a peptide or an oligonucleotide, but who are the experts? And the way that we work is we are saying we are not going to build everything ourselves. We will make collaborations with groups that just knows this much better than we do. So I kind of, imagine we have a small core of an R&D organization, but we're like an octopus. We have like an arm that goes out here, another arm that goes out there. So our capacity is huge. And just like an octopus, actually, wickedly intelligent, because we as an organization only know so much. But when we kind of, borrow expertise, knowledge from elsewhere, our total kind of intellect really expands, disproportionately. So that's the way we've done it. It has worked really, really well. So that's. I don't know if there's anything. There's nothing that particularly rocket science novel in it, but it's down to some key principles though that we truly believe in collaboration and communication. We believe that we only will know so much. We have to reach out and learn and piggyback and stand on someone else's broader shoulders for the sake of the patients. That way we can do things faster, more efficiently, with a much higher probability of success than this almost impossible mission of building an organization that can do everything itself.
Yeah, and I've talked to a lot of biotech CEOs and founders on this podcast, and one of the things that is really interesting is the different ways you can have a coherent strategy. Like some people do take the platform model, and Alnylam, which you mentioned,
I've been there.
Is a great example that knows
it was fun.
Everything you possibly can about RNA. But other companies go like you're building an expertise in this therapeutic domain, in this group of patients, and you can really build a deep understanding there, and then be flexible on the technology. And I think both can work, right? And that's the beauty of it. And everybody can try and come together and collaborate to bring the technology specialists with the domain.
But I do think though one thing is important to be successful, and sometimes I reflect on the progress we've made. I deeply believe in deep domain expertise. At the end of it, you got to build a company based on content knowledge. And I think if you do that, your probability of making the right choices are much, much, much higher.
Yeah.
I think it's hard for companies that has a platform that, ends up kind of having, or here's some neurology, here's some hematology, here's some nephrology, here's some dermatology, because it's very hard to kind of build companies that has real domain expertise everywhere. Now, one of the things with the company we are building, is, by the way, that, very small R&D organization, but we've been involved with 60% of all approved drugs in this space. 60%.
Wow.
Isn't that crazy?
Explain that to me.
No, just, go through the list. Every single hemophilia product, every single product in, factor 13 deficiency, von Willebrand's disease. If you put them all together, 60% of them, there's a Hemab employee that can put a name to one of it. Isn't that wild?
That is. Yeah. What are some of the biggest learnings from that collective experience?
Well, I think it is, you end up really understanding the biology at a level that is kind of unusual.
Yeah.
You also, because when you have walked the development from discovery to regulatory approval, launch, commercial, you also get a really, really, experienced nose for what does good look like, and what does not, what is not good look like. So I think, and by the way, there are many rights. That's the other thing you get to learn, is there are many ways of getting to a medicine that helps people. It is not, cookie cutter, must do it always the same way. And, it's fascinating, right? From the very first recombinant factor VIII to pegylated factor VIII, glycopegylated factor VIII, IXs, been involved with bispecific factor VIII mimetics. I still have one of my Alnylam babies is fitusiran. That has also now become a drug on the market. Yeah. It's like 10 years in the making, right? Every single experience teach you something that hopefully generates a total, knowledge sphere that increases our probability of being successful.
Yeah. One thing I was curious to ask you about is what you've learned from patients and doctors in different parts of the world. You mentioned, the Middle East, the US, Europe, Japan. There's lots of different markets and parts of the world where standard of care is different. The patient population is different. What are some of the big learnings about how this manifests? And with hemophilia, we probably don't just have a male bias, but also have a European bias, right? Of how we've looked at that disease.
Yeah, probably. Well, I think it's actually a really hard question, because I think the disease is equally severe everywhere. Healthcare systems are highly different. Awareness can be very different from region to region. Because we are talking about autosomal diseases that equally affects men and women, what you learn around the world is that the gender health equality is unfortunately no different in the United States or Western Europe than it is in more remote areas of the world, or more developing regions of the world. I also think when you meet people in rural parts of India or Pakistan or in China or in Indonesia, you will learn that the raw natural history of these bleeding disorders, which is important to keep in mind, because sometimes we are thinking that I don't know how many times I get the question from an investor, but is there any unmet need? Like, oh, you should go talk to people in Bangalore and Vellore and Chennai in India and ask them about severity of Glanzmann Thrombasthenia. I did recently at a meeting in Dubai. I was standing looking at a poster. It was a group from India who presented. They've recently identified 60 patients with Glanzmann Thrombasthenia, and I thought it's strange. There's not a lot of women here. There's like only 15 women. It's autosomal. It should be an equal amount of men and women. And the physician from India looked at me and said, because all the women are dead.
In childbirth.
They die when they get their period.
Oh my gosh.
You learn things like that. And sometimes it's important that every single of those stories, every single person who suffers like that is the ultimate motivator for changing treatment, right? Super touching.
Yeah. What are the big things on your priority list this year and next year? Maybe you could give people a little bit of a sense of where you are as a company.
Yeah, so I think we have made an enormous amount of progress, which I'm super proud of. Sotatamig now is through phase 2. So a lot of the remainder of this year is processing all of that data, getting ready to find a way to then take the next steps towards a pivotal trial for Sotatamig in Glanzmann Thrombasthenia. I believe that can start sometime mid next year. Because of the very positive data we have so far for Sotatamig, we are expanding into factor 7 deficiency, so starting a second phase 2 trial. That will be exciting to kind of follow that over the next 6-9 months. And then our second program is HMB-002 in von Willebrand's disease. We got the very little bits of proof of mechanism data we presented a couple of weeks back at ISGH. And talk about this the motivation when you get positive data. You are like, your impatience goes through the roof. Can't wait to see more. So important to keep that on track. All of this is really done under an umbrella of a very, very close collaboration with people living with these bleeding disorders. We've done a Glanzmann 360 natural history, the factor 7 deficiency 360, the von Willebrand's disease 360. You put these together, we've kind of collected data from more than 1,000 people living with bleeding disorder like these. Keep on collaborating really closely with patient advocacies, the National Bleeding Disorder Foundation here in the United States, but also pockets throughout Europe. European Hemophilia Consortium have like specialized subgroups. There are some really enthusiastic physicians and nurses around the world that are generating registries and collecting natural history data. All of this is super important because if there's not a perfect match between the lived experience and the medicine we're making the wrong medicine. Super focused on making sure we really truly integrate this. And then we're not done yet. We just started in my optics. We're going to do a lot more for women and girls with bleeding. There's no doubt that there is just a disproportionate unmet need. It has been neglected. There's socio-economic, professional impacts here beyond the immediate medical quality of life impact. That's something super passionate about and want to make sure we as an organization with our domain expertise keep on pursuing that going forward. And then we keep listening. I've had conversations just over the last couple of weeks of some, super rare bleeding disorders with extreme unmet need. And I'm like, eventually we are finding a way of offering the Hemab domain expertise to make sure we also help there.
Well, one of the I guess formal ways of listening in our industry is natural history studies that you mentioned. It's a very structured way of listening, and I'm curious to learn what you've learned about running natural history studies, because I think you've done a combination of the heavy natural history study where it's almost like a clinical trial, right, where patients are going to sites, getting really detailed workups, and then you've also done lighter weight, much broader versions of natural history where you're capturing patients' lived experience at home. You're not requiring them to go to sites all the time. And I think we see natural history studies in rare disease in particular that are very almost clinical trial-like and heavy, but there's a broad spectrum of that. So I'd love if you could share a little bit what you learned about designing these trials. Yeah,
so I am not a believer that one way of doing this is better than another way. I actually think they're very complementary. Yes, we can structure them almost like clinical trials. We can make international surveys. We can make apps where you collect cross-sectional data, perspective data. You get qualitative kind of data. You can ask for, clinic visits where you get some biochemical data collected. And it's one set of collecting at that type of natural history. But let's not underestimate the much more unbiased, the much more just outreach, collaborating, where people are actually coming forward themselves and saying, I have seen this advertisement. I am interested in sharing information. And I think that sometimes it's almost like real world data, that you get narratives that you haven't asked for per protocol, but you kind of get information that way. I think each of these sets of data are reflective of the total experience. So there is not like a method that must be that is superior to another one. I think they're very complementary of each other. And remember, one thing is asking phenotypic data, where you are kind of like asking people's. You may already be diagnosed, and now you are asking questions, which will be, of course, influenced by your life, your upbringing, the physicians, the nurses you have contacted. But imagine a much more unbiased way where you are kind of like reaching out to a community, and they're kind of self-diagnosing themselves. Yeah. That can be genetically validated, sure. The information they're providing is equally super exciting. So I think we have, and we are super open-minded to collecting data from multiple different kind of sources, because I think the total amount of information is what eventually tells us what is the real lived experience, and what are the challenges, right? If people don't know yet they have the disease, how do we best help them kind of come to that conclusion, I do or I don't? So it has to be, in the modern world, patients are actually finding care, information about treatment, information about genetics, information about community. They're finding that even before we reached out. And we got to kind of live in that novel digital way of thinking, and can't just be stuck in a paper survey,
When you run into people who don't necessarily see the world that way, often it's maybe investors and maybe healthcare providers. Sometimes I find people are stuck in thinking about it as every patient follows this linear path through the healthcare system. What do you do to help people see the complexity of the world as it is?
And so this is not necessarily always a particularly easy conversation, right? Because people can be very stubborn in their beliefs and minds. I actually think showing data collected in different ways can be very powerful and eye-opening for people. So I prefer to kind of have those discussions based on data and say, look, we've collaborated here with people focusing on the genetics and the identification of people. Here we are collaborating with people that are 100% focused on phenotypic characteristics. We've collaborated with a nurse with a PhD who is specialized in collecting and summarizing qualitative data. And when you kind of show all of that data, most people are like, oh, I see. It's not a straight road. There are many ways in the patient journey.
What's the biggest thing that you learned at Alnylam? I know you were medical lead on the hemophilia product while you were there, right? What was the biggest thing that lesson or that experience about you?
You know what? This will surprise you. I loved, the fact of working with a molecular science, a technology like RNAi that just kept on working and getting better was, of course, unbelievably motivating. And you get into that belief that you can actually reimagine things, because there are actually technologies that eventually will be able. But honestly, the most important thing I learned at Alnylam was down to leadership. Is down to remembering that everything we do is personal. Remembering that nothing can be done by hiring a unique oracle of an individual. Everything we do together. We only leap by being a neural network of people with ideas, creativity, and just an unbelievable passion and resilience to just keep going. So my biggest memory of Alnylam is down to being exposed to that very unique leadership, driven by very unique individuals like John Raganori, the founding CEO, the president of R&D, Akshay Vaishnav, have had just, significant influence in the way I think, and the way I also try to influence the way we build Hemab today.
Yeah.
And I've heard two things from John that is burned into my DNA actually, is that everything we do is personal, and if we keep that in mind, we are more likely to make the right decisions than the wrong decisions. And then John is an example himself, and an enormous inspiration for being unreasonable.
Yeah.
And
say more about that. I want to hear more about that.
So that is if I succeed in life, that word will be on my gravestone, because I really truly believe in this. Being unreasonable is this: just do not adhere to reasonable thinking. Do not adhere to conventional thinking. Do not take for granted when you have done 5 or 10 calls and every single of your trusted colleagues says there's no unmet need, then it's not going to work. This is a waste of your time and energy. Just do not accept it.
Yeah.
Consistently be unreasonable and believe that there is way to disrupt. We may not even know what good and what transformational look like yet. Yeah. But if we every day we go to work, try to kind of be unreasonable in our thinking, we are much more likely to actually make true transformational medicines. So that I'm a huge advocate for. I try to practice it every single day.
Yeah. Are there any other unreasonable people that you admire, or unreasonable companies led by unreasonable people?
I've actually I've done the following. I am unreasonable to the extent absolutely possible, and I have surrounded myself by a bunch of unreasonable people.
Yeah. And
I'm super proud of that. That the team that we are building at every single level in the company has a piece of that in them. Yeah. So yeah. Wonderful.
Maybe similar but slightly different topic, change of gears. We share something in common, which is we're both girl dads, and it may be unreasonable to suggest that you can be both a great dad and a great CEO, but that's an unreasonable line that I'm going to walk, and I know that you are as well. What have you learned about being both a great dad and great CEO at the same time?
I mean, that one, I hope they're not listening. They could be, because I know you are recording it on YouTube. Here's the following. I am actually to my core, I'm super passionate about leadership. I'm super passionate about diversity, inclusion, and then being a proud dad of 2 girls. I call them my power girls. I am surprised, if not every day, every week, on how much I actually learn from these unbelievable young women. And one of the things that I constantly is inspired about is they have kind of been, they've been born into a global world. They have been raised as global citizens. And now, more than myself, many times, just have a much more, true global embracing view of life. that is super inspiring. So I think this embracing that there's not a right culture or wrong culture. There's not right politics, wrong politics. There's not a wrong way and a right way of living. There are, in general, just a lot of interesting, colorful cultures and right way of living in life. Keeping that in mind is actually super important as we try to make medicines for people that have not been served for several decades. And a lot of it is down to that there has been an absence of true inclusion. There has been a neglect of, in particularly, women-related kind of bleeding. So actually living in a household where these two, global power girl citizens are constantly inspiring me. They don't even know, I think, but they are, is super motivating. All other things equal, I owe them a lot for trying to kind of be as good as a CEO as I can. They are definitely, they carry a lot of the reason for that.
Yeah, amazing. Well, I just want to thank you for taking the time to be with us today, and also dedicating so much of your career to this huge segment of the population that I think we, with your leadership, are going to have much better therapies for in the coming years. So is there any final shout outs or anything you'd like to make? Are you looking for partners, collaborators? Are you hiring in any kind of roles? This is a good time to shout it out.
It's a little advertisement.
Yes.
No, I really appreciate, by the way, that you are inviting me into this room for a little bit to share. I think it's more like a statement. We will continue to try to kind of live in this biotechnological revolution. We will continue to listen to people that have unmet need. And for as long as I'm at the steering wheel, we're going to try to kind of make new medicines that advance it in the most kind of thoughtful, responsible way possible. I think things we learn in biotech all the time is that there is a trend to kind of like making it a bit cold, a little too little hard, and there is an obsession about the money. About the earnings, the price, and I think what I would love to kind of make as a statement is, reimagining blood clotting therapies at the heart of human resilience is we will do our best to intellectually break barriers, but we will always do it with the heart in the right place. I'm committed to continue to be in direct with my colleagues, my peers, but equally be direct with patients and caregivers, and commit to them that, hey, yes, there's business here, there's pure science, but there's also just a lot of heart, emotion, and passion, and that is overwhelmingly what drives what we do.
Yeah. And that will be there when times are hard, and the money isn't always there, right? We know biotech has been hard, but the science marches on, and putting patients at the heart of it is absolutely the right message. So thank you for all your leadership here.
Thank you, Patrick. I appreciate the invitation.
It is my pleasure. And thanks everybody, as always, for listening, and we'll see you next time. That wraps up this week's episode of the Genetics Podcast. I'd like to give a huge thank you to our guests for sharing their valuable insights and experience. And thank you as well to our listeners, as always, for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's talk, the number one thing I would really appreciate from you is if you could share it with a friend or colleague who you think would enjoy it as well. We would also really appreciate if you could subscribe to our show and give us a quick rate and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform. Both of these things help us become more visible when people search for genetics and precision medicine podcasts. And we're always eager to hear from you. Please reach out to us with any questions or feedback on social media. You can find Sanogenetics on Twitter, LinkedIn, or visit sanogenetics.com. Finally, a big thank you to the team behind the scenes who make all this possible. In particular, Amy Cousins and Sonia Shah, who produced the show, and James Pierce from Selected Frequencies, who handles the audio engineering. I'm Patrick Short, your host, and it's been a pleasure. Thank you, and we'll see you next time on the Genetics Podcast.